So while everyone gets situated, I just wanted to say I too am delighted to see that we're not skirting around the tough issues, including what's happening right now in Gaza and in Israel. This panel is about not skirting around the tough issues. And in particular, I think that's why we've chosen a lineup of senior leaders, incredibly capable in their own organizations, but willing to talk about not just what works, but what's not working, what needs to change, or what hasn't worked in the past. So with me, I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves. Obviously, I've got Steve, I've got Darren, I've got Paris, I've got Katherine. Could we just quickly, 30 seconds each, tell us, name a little bit about where you work, but so we can leave as much time as possible for the gritty questions. Katherine, you first.
Hi, I'm Katherine FitzGerald. I'm Chief People Officer at Reddington, an investment consulting firm. I've been there 3 years or so. Prior to that, I worked in the tech sector, aviation, and various other things besides.
So I'm Paris Anand. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Artemis, which is a boutique investment manager. We're about sort of 200 people, and I've been there for about 18 months. Prior to that, I was at Fidelity International for 10 years in London and in Asia.
Wonderful. Welcome both.
Great. I'm Darren Johnson. I'm the Global COO of Impacts Asset Management. We're a sustainable asset management firm. We have about 300 people now and about 40 billion under management. I also sit on the CIC Diversity Project Board, as well as other charitable boards.
Steve Butler. I'm Chief Exec of Punter South, or Spire, which is a pension consulting and employee benefits firm with about 200 staff.
Wonderful. Thank you and welcome all. So I should say this panel is not just for questions from me. I have quite a few, and I promise that, they will be very focused on some of the challenging things we face as an industry and as a society. But the panel is also for you. So again, back to Slido. I'm going to be taking questions as they come through. So if you have something you'd like to ask, I will do my best to integrate those. I already have several dozen questions that came in over social media, so thank you to everyone. I grouped them into 3 themes already and put them through in what we're going to discuss today. So send your question in at any time, and I'll do my best to involve them. So given this panel is focused on what works, I want to start first with something that really doesn't work, and then get your opinion on it. The first thing being, I see so many firms who go out and say inclusion and diversity, equity, equality, whether it's the DEI or even the B, the belonging, is a strategic priority. And then they do some events and some drinks and some things that you can come along to. And their operational execution of what is arguably the greatest change management program of the last few decades falls short in quite a number of ways, without the budget, without the right skills, without the right people, without the right intensity, et cetera. And in particular, when we look at an environment where resources are challenged, I imagine we might go back towards this. So it doesn't work if we make it event-led. It absolutely works when we make it strategic and we operationalize change in this place. So the first question to the panel is, have you ever been guilty of doing the event-led, sort of sweet but ineffectual approach to inclusion? It's a good place to start, for sure. How'd you get out of it? How do you move from that place to one that is a bit more strategic? Steve, do you want to take that one first?
So I'm going to be completely honest at the risk of booze, but so 5 years ago, growing a fast-growing business, and my priorities were revenue, profit, and shareholders, and EDI was barely on my register. Someone in the business said we should join the diversity project. It's just starting, so I thought, yeah, great idea. We'll kind of do that. And in all honesty, it was a tick in the box tactical thing, right?
Sometimes we start that way.
And then 6 months later, an employee said to me, so what do you think about gender? And I didn't have an answer, and that kind of led me to kind of reflect on this and talk more. I have 6 daughters who were teenagers at the time, and we had many kind of debates over dinner about this. And I thought, no, this isn't a tactical thing anymore. I've got to face this head on if I want a generation, if I want my children to go into this industry. So I said, right, it's got to be strategic. But the challenge I had was that my business was shaped by the shape of the industry, and I'd grown through acquisition. So I had an exco of 6 white men that kind of looked like me. Couldn't fire them because that would be HR would get me for that. So how was I going to change the shape of it? So I thought, well, what I've got to do, radical. I'm going to disband the exco. I'm not going to have that group anymore. And I'm going to replace it with a series of opcos where I had a much deeper set of people from across the industry, more diversity, shaping the leadership discussion and the leadership direction. And so that one strategic thing had profound impact across the business because now everyone was, or a broad cross-section of people were involved in it. And I became very aware that my challenge was actually, I had no pipeline of future talent that was going to replace my white male managers.
Yeah.
So the next thing was, well, I'm going to put in place a leadership skills academy, and I'm going to cultivate the people in my business to replace me when I go. And I think those 2 strategic things cascaded across the business and transformed how we as a business think and operate.
So in essence, you chose a new leadership model that gave different voices and different opportunities, and then at the same time built skills and did a grow your own model, right? If we're not getting it from the industry, we're going to have to design, develop, and grow the leaders that we need and want.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about gender. It was about building an inclusive culture that included everyone and had a sign out the door that said everyone's kind of welcome here. We can accommodate everyone in this business.
Can I actually ask a question? Because that was really interesting. So I was going to say, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's really important for innovation. We've done research to say it will grow your business, it will help you be more nimble, you can become a more effective organization and be successful. You clearly didn't believe that, right? So if you because for me, I'm like, if that's true, it has to be a priority, it has to be a business priority, right? Yeah. So it's really interesting to me because there's always this talk about, we keep saying it and people understand it, but no one does anything about it. So to me, they don't really necessarily believe the benefits of it.
Well, it's 5 years ago, I'd never thought about it.
Yeah.
There wasn't a case of, no, it's wrong. I just hadn't thought about it. I was just too focused on other things. And then when you learn, you're like, well, actually, it does create more productivity. And we've had some fantastic evolution in our services and products that have come out of the growing diversity within our business.
I think, Darren, on that point, it's really challenging for organizations who are seeing financial success over and over and over again, who happen to be really insular and not very diverse, to go, I see a lot of if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mentality here. And I think that is one of the hardest groups of leaders to break into because they don't see the impetus for it. I think they will over time if we look at where the world is going, where opportunity is going, where growth is going, and we'll come to that, where growth is coming from. But I think it's hard when it's going really, really well if you don't buy in anyway, to buy in on the level that you're talking about.
Yeah, I say what is really well. So when you look at success, it's relative, right? So you could be even more successful.
Yeah.
So I think the way people look at things.
How we measure success matters.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Paris, did you have anything you wanted to add to the moving to more strategic and more intentional?
Yeah, I mean, I think that coming back to the sort of the framing of your question, I mean, you're absolutely right that there's a sort of only a limit that events and all of these things can take you. But I'd also say that, if we are being really honest with ourselves, lots and lots of organizations in our industry, that is where they started. Yeah. And it's not a bad thing. It's just, that's what the start of a journey looks like. But to me, the biggest step that I think organizations need to make is that sort of transition from what I describe as kind of shallow intent to deep intent. And in order to make that step, I think it's really critical to explain to the organization the why this is strategic. It's not sufficient enough just to say it is strategic. It's the why. What is it that this is going to equip us with? What are the insights it's going to give us? What is the opportunities that it's going to present to us if we do this? Yeah. But also then what are we going to miss out on if we don't?
Don't do this.
And that, I think, is the point where, and I think that when I look at the sort of the how organizations then sort of, function around it, there's a really interesting kind of duality in a sense that there has to be that commitment, that clarity, that conviction from the very senior leadership, but there also has to feel that sense of ownership throughout the organization to make it really, really effective.
You've just led me to what I think is a fantastic question that came in from LinkedIn. And I'm going to read it word for word because I think this is a really important question. Do you, the panel, explicitly use performance measurement tools, annual appraisals, or similar process to measure, acknowledge, reward, and prioritize inclusion and diversity? And do you hold members of your team accountable for what they do in this space?
So maybe I can start by answering that. So one of the things that we've introduced at Artemis is an element around our sort of performance and assessment and reward scheme, which particularly foregrounds culture. So it's not specifically on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I think you can't get away from the link between inclusive behavior, cultural contribution, people that are culture carriers, and just making, and to me, the kind of the statement of making that part of our, reward proposition, I think just gives it a level of visibility and commitment in the organization that I think we would miss if it wasn't there.
And by that, are you talking about we reward not only the what, but the how it was done and the way culture was shaped?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're not trying to be prescriptive about it. I think we are operating in a space where actually you kind of know it when you see it. You kind of look around your organization and you feel like those individuals are the culture carriers. Why are they the culture carriers? What are they doing above and beyond? And what you want to do is to really, I'm a big fan of that quote from Charlie Munger. He says, if you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. And whilst it might not be true on a day-by-day basis, if you're really trying to evolve a system, incentives play an important role.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to move us on. I have something specifically I wanted to talk about that when I first met Darren and Paris as a preparation for today, they both used the term equity. And actually, as someone who works in the inclusion space, I hear the term equity quite a lot from professionals in the diversity profession, but not so broadly from C-suite members. And they were both really intentional about the use of the word. I just want to pause for a second on equity versus equality and why embracing equity is part of the change we're seeking. I don't know, Darren, if you want to take that one first.
Sure. Okay, so the best way to maybe start this is to maybe say a little story. So I'm simplifying it, so I'm sure there may be questions. So I often meet with I have friends that are CEOs in the industry, and I had a CEO come to me and he was just saying, look, I've got a problem in my organization. I've got these, my colleagues, particularly my female colleagues, are really upset with me. So why are they upset with you? What have you done? And he said, we were hiring a head of distribution role, and we had a male and female in the last round, and I gave the job to the male. I said, okay, well, tell me about your process. Like, what's wrong with that? And he explained, look, I'm simplifying. He said, the male had 20 years experience. He said the female also had 20 years experience, but she had 5 years out. He said that both of them were in the final round. He said the female took the 5 years out to bring up 2 children. And they were neck and neck. And the only way to kind of set them apart was to do another presentation. It was a presentation on distribution for a particular region. So he had the 2 of them do that presentation. And the male did better than the woman in that situation. And so he explained that, and he said, look, so I went through this process, complete meritocracy, the male gets it because the male did a better job, right? And I said to him, okay, so just let me understand this. So this woman has been out for 5 years, she's brought up 2 kids. Did you give any kind of weighting or consideration to that? She was also in the final round, right, of this, and she said 5 years out, and this guy's done a better presentation, and obviously just looking at it, thinking about it simply, he's probably had 5 years more opportunity to do a better presentation than this lady. So to me, when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, if I was going to war, which one would I take? I'd probably take the woman, because she must have a mentality to be in the final round, to be up against this person, having 5 years out and actually bringing up 2 children in that scenario. So I don't know what the right answer is, but I just know that I would be giving a weighting to maybe the skills and the opportunity that that woman has brought, given that she had that 5 years out with her kids. And so he was like, oh God, you know, because I was treating them equally. And I said to him the simple thing: equal's not always fair, right? And to me, you know, you haven't given any equity to that woman's position. And so, like, it was a revelation to him. And he does the right thinking. He just didn't understand. He just didn't really consider this point. And so now, hopefully, he will consider this point going forward. So I think you have to be really intentional about equity. You've got to look at. I can give you so many scenarios and different examples of where equity needs to come into play. You know, and I always say it when people think about, you know, when they're trying to hire someone with 20 years experience, and like, well, if you're hiring someone with 20 years experience, they're probably going to look like you. And also, what is experience? Don't mix up experience with expertise, right? Experience doesn't necessarily mean someone's going to be good at their job. What probably helps them be good at their job is their expertise. And expertise can come from 2 years in a job. It's all about your mindset. So the way you look at talent and the way you understand it and the way you attribute equity is really, really important, and you need to be intentional with it.
There's so much in there. I do love that statement that equal is not always fair, and actually frequently it's not fair if we're honest with ourselves. And looking at talent fundamentally differently in how we weight and what we measure and how we adjust. Unless there's somebody, I want to move on to what feels like a really natural bit to this. So when we make adjustments, when we do things like that equity-based adjustment that you're talking about, Darren, it's those sorts of moves, as well as the target setting. And by the way, I've got some great questions about targets and quotas coming in. So hold that, I'll come to them, those of you in the audience who have asked them. I think the more we talk about it, the more we focus on it, and we've been talking about this stuff for decades, and the more we make interventions that are visible like this, the more pushback we get. I mean, if we haven't been paying attention to the pushback, whether it's out there in the political arena or it's within the organization going, this doesn't feel very right, or it doesn't feel fair, or I feel left behind as a insert group here. I think I just want to talk about that growing pushback and the fear of being left behind that's happening. So first, do you recognize these frustrations? Do you think they're real? Am I making them up? And secondly, what could leaders in this room do in order to help address some of that pushback? Because I think the pushback comes from a place of win-lose. If that woman wins, this man loses. Or if those individuals of color win, then white people lose. We have an unwritten belief that it's win-lose rather than win-win. So I don't know who would like to, there's 2 questions there. Do you recognize the frustrations? And how do we make it win-win?
I'll go first. Yeah, absolutely. I think that frustration comes from fear. My experience is it's a fear of change. People don't understand. They haven't really engaged with the topic. And I think we were just talking earlier how there are entrenched views on two ends, either end of the spectrum, but a huge swathe of people in between who either haven't fully engaged or don't fully understand and see DEI as such a huge topic that they either haven't got the time or they just haven't taken the time to sort of engage with. And so for me, it's key that you engage with those the people who are frustrated and the extremes as well, to really understand what's driving that frustration and try and build their knowledge, build their engagement. And what is amazing is when you can get somebody who's been a naysayer, someone who's a skeptic, to actually recognize and have the aha moment, a bit like Darren was just saying, and then turn into an ally, turn into an advocate, and then really champion the agenda as well. And so picking out those people who do feel left behind, who are frustrated, and helping to breed their understanding so that they aren't corrosive to the culture as well, I think is something that I've tried to do very a lot in our organizations I've worked in. So.
Thank you, Katherine.
Maybe one thing I would sort of add to that is that, you know, going back to, if you like, the imperatives of your organisation, it's ensuring that the work that you do in this space is for absolutely everybody. And I want to talk a little bit about, you know, the point that Darren made about equity, and equity is about sort of recognising the journey that people have taken to get to where they are. Now, we might link that very specifically to people from, you know, minority backgrounds, but actually when you extend that to everybody in your organization, you realize that different people have taken a journey to get to where they are. So actually everybody in your organization is a beneficiary of you inculcating kind of some of that inclusive, empathetic mindset into your organization. And when it doesn't feel like you know, something that's afforded to a subset of your population, but it's genuinely seen as a whole organizational commitment, it does start to, you know, I don't know if this is the right expression, but people do start to exhale a little bit about this. But again, that's about communication. That's about it actually being real versus you saying it, and it's down to, you know, people throughout your organization to really understand that that's what this work means.
Right. So in there, I think there is not only how we message it, but our ability to listen to people in their frustration and see the why, the kernel of why they're feeling so frustrated, but also to make sure that we are clearly articulating the benefit to all. I also think there's the not pitting people against each other with the way we architect our programs bit, which hasn't come up, but I think this is important. And today there was something that crossed my LinkedIn feed that I fully believe in, but hadn't really thought about in a while, which was this concept that women are better at parenting somehow, or better at nappy changing than men. And there's an HBR article that says, it turns out you can become a great dad from the very beginning, and that parenting is a skill that can be learned. So it's basically an HBR article that says that parenting is a skill that can be equally learned by men and women. So I just want to pick on one particular policy / implementation. Do any of you have equal shared parental leave where men get the same amount of time off as women to go change those nappies and do some of that domestic labor? Because my worry is, when we don't have policies that do things like elevate men in nurturing positions and, you know, value parenting, and I don't want to talk only about parenting, but as an example, those sorts of policies say we support women, but we don't support men, and they reinforce some pretty fundamental gender stereotypes that we're trying to get away from and leave behind. Are we backing it up with our policies?
I'll be honest, I absolutely subscribe to that as a view. I haven't implemented yet because it's quite an expensive policy to implement. What I have done in the organisation is I've encouraged my men to use our sabbatical policy to bolt it onto their holiday to kind of add so that we get that kind of same experience. And I've had a number of people in the organisation where their partner's taken 6 months for the first 6 months of the birth of the baby, and then the other partner's taken the other 6 months, and then the child can go into childcare. Okay. So it's working, but in a growing business,
it's hard.
It's hard. It's a difficult decision to make.
And a small business too. It's a much easier to absorb and so I probably asked it, maybe one to ask in your firms, if they're bigger firms in particular. There is a financial implication to that. This is a great question that just came in, which comes to it, was how do we avoid alienating white men? Just as a blatant, direct question, love whoever asked it. I think it's a really good question, because in this space, the propensity for those who are feeling left behind to be in that category is quite high, in my experience.
Sorry, jumping in again. I think there's an issue about how you approach this. So I think as a CEO, how am I going to grow my business? I can grow my business by 5% by doing the same thing over year after year with the same group of people. Or I can make my business more diverse, more reflective of my client base, and I can innovate and I can grow my business faster. So I think as a CEO, it's a blend of the two. Yeah. You know, so if I can grow a bigger business and I can diversify the business in the process, and I carry on doing what I'm doing with my existing people, everybody wins. Nobody's left out. And over time, the culture of the business changes, and then that kind of white guy left behind is gone.
And didn't you mention something when we first met? You said something about the average pot is 61,000.
Yeah, so the average pension wealth at the point of retirement today, according to FCA, is £61,000. So most of us in the room are dealing in bigger numbers than that, I kind of hope. But we don't think about that when we're designing products and designing services, that's what the average consumer looks like in the UK. So I think we need to bring some of that experience into our own organisations so we can bake that into our kind of product design.
So by growing the pie, you're suggesting the more that we are thinking about the different, both diverse in diversity categories and protected characteristics, but more broadly, more people serviced as an industry, supporting them with the right products and support. Okay. I have so many questions, and they're literally coming in thick and fast online. I'm going to talk, I want to do one more in this kind of, in the negative space, because I think if we don't lean into what's not working, it's hard to create the what is working. I see a huge rise in people who have a fear of saying or doing the wrong thing. And working in this space, it will either be a man, worried about saying the wrong thing to a woman, or a white person worried about saying the wrong thing to a person of color, or a person without a disability, you name it. It's the how do I show up as an intentional ally for other groups and not put my foot in it. I see that fear growing. And the more technology that can bind together amazing causes and do good, that technology also makes people fearful of saying the wrong thing. Everything I've just said is just right up there for everyone to read forevermore online, right? So technology, I think, exacerbates that fear. And you can have trial by Twitter very quickly in our current environment. Are you guys, as part of your inclusion programs, focused on that fear and how we alleviate it? Because I think people in firms, small, medium, or big, have this, I'm worried about saying or doing the wrong thing. And if we're stuck about not able to say anything, are we going to fix it?
You can't move beyond the conversation, is what I like to say. So I think it's all about relationships. Our industry is about relationships. It's about people. People are the most important asset in our industry. So to me, it's like, if you have a compliance officer, the first time you speak to a compliance officer is when you have a problem. That is a problem, right? So you need to develop that relationship with that compliance officer. So when you come, you need help, whatever the situation is, you can have a good dialogue and resolve that situation. So to me, I think leaders and everyone needs to be intentional about expanding their networks and talking to people. Getting to know them and building relationships, because then when a time does come and an event happens like George Floyd, for example, I know a lot of CEOs and senior people didn't talk about it because they were scared that they may say something that might offend someone. So if you already had a relationship with someone or someone that's different to you in your organization, you can have maybe that conversation, and maybe even if you made a misstep, everyone understands where we're coming from because there's a level of trust. But if I'm already now starting to talk about something, it's the first time you've ever interacted with me, you're going to have a bit of mistrust. You're only doing it because you're ticking a box. You're only doing it because everyone says you should. So I think it's really important to build relationships. You've got to understand, if this is why it really frustrates me in this industry. If we say people are our most important asset, why are we not acting that way? We have to act that way. So
I think I've got multiple people wanting to come in on top. Darren, you've stirred up something good here.
No,
Katherine.
I had exactly the same. I used to work, when George Floyd's murder, I was working in a technology firm and we had a New York office, and the language that was acceptable in the UK with our UK staff was not acceptable within, saying people of colour was acceptable in the US, but you said ethnic minority in the UK, and the leadership team, who are primarily based in the UK, we got it so wrong, and we isolated the New York team, and it was under COVID. We couldn't, and so we couldn't go there to try and resolve it. And part of the problem was we hadn't talked enough about these issues before. And so for me, it's absolutely regular dialogue, and be open, listen to the feedback and respond to it, show that you care. And if you come across as authentic, people will know, they'll forgive you. If you get it wrong, you'll listen, you'll change the next time. If it's just a one and done, then you don't stand a chance. And
So whenever anybody says to me, I'm really scared about saying the wrong thing, I always say, just start by listening. There's no compulsion for you to go first. if you start by listening and don't feel that you've got to sort of, it's a better place. You'll kind of, you'll first of all show that you're kind of committed to hearing and learning. And then, if people see that, even if there are sort of, you get your terminology slightly wrong, people will know the intention with which you came in. So, because I do think that, and this is another reason that I feel that this whole area is so critical to the evolution in our industry in particular, is that we do need, as an industry, to move from one of broadcast, from one of telling people, what is good for them, to one of, to one of listening.
Yeah.
So.
I think those are great, starting by showing you care and signaling your intentionality. Somebody said to me last weekend, humans are really good at reading intention, actually. We're very good at understanding whether the intentionality was positive or negative by the situational context, and start by listening. I would also add in, don't be lazy, because I think there's a lot of people who say, I'm worried about saying the wrong thing, and then you go, which book have you read? Which podcast have you listened to? Which step have you taken in order to educate yourself? So I think it's okay to also put that challenge out there going, I know you're afraid of saying the wrong thing, but you're not going to figure that out if you're not doing anything. So a bit of nudge from the passivity side, which a great question just came in. Oh gosh, I'm going to lose it in this. Speaking of passivity, how do members of the panel challenge bystander culture in their firms today? I think it was a great question, by the way. Any thoughts on bystander culture? In particular, actually, Helena, because you were talking about some pretty significant events, and bystander culture can be something really small, or it can be something really, really big. So how do we challenge it?
So I think this ultimately is back to the strategic point. This has to start at the top of the organization. And you said about kind of empathy and kind of trust in the business. Ultimately, if we're going to build a more diverse industry, we need an inclusive culture, and we're only going to build an inclusive culture with trust. So we can't have passive leaders. I think it starts with us. And we have to not be bystanders ourselves. And as a white CEO, I was kind of nervous putting my head above the parapet kind of 5 years ago, because I probably have said many wrong things, but because nobody else is putting their head above the parapet. So I think it needs more people to stand up and not be passive, and then we're all more comfortable with it.
Okay. I'm conscious of time. I'm watching that clock ticking. I have a couple of really important questions I want to get to. So I want to talk about race equality and whether or not we're making progress. So I love how diverse the panel is. So thank you for all the reasons of diversity here. But I know that came carefully architected, right? And I'm looking around the room going, this is one of the most diverse financial services moments I've had in a while, and wondering of the others who aren't here for just a second. I just want to talk about the numbers. Now, obviously, the FCA has clocked onto this. You'll see in their new sort of, there's a new focus coming. But we've made huge progress of women on boards and women in that pipeline level. We can see it with the Hampton-Alexander Review, the 30% Club, all the things that we've done. There is measurable numeric progress for women in leadership levels in this country. But in 2014, Green Park measured the top 3 leaders in all FTSE 100 organizations, and measured ethnicity, and only 10 were. That is the same, so 10 out of 100, 10 out of 300 actually. That number hasn't increased since 2014. So we're in 2023, and we have the same ethnic makeup at the top of the FTSE 100 top 3 roles. And as of last week, 100 of the FTSE 250 either had 0 ethnic minorities on their board or had not disclosed. And then you look at our data for England and Wales, so 18% ethnic minorities in England and Wales. In London, 46% of individuals, right? We live in a city of incredible diversity, including racial, ethnic, and religious diversity. Are we taking race as seriously as we should? And by the way, 1 in 4 between the age of 18 and 29 is an ethnic minority in all of England. 1 in 4, that's 25%. are we taking it seriously, and what could we be doing differently to take it more seriously? Why should we be taking it more seriously?
Yeah, I can talk. Our approach, we're a 200-person company, so shifting the ethnic makeup of our staff takes a while. We have been focusing for several years now on particularly our graduate intake, because that's our sort of largest intake of people through the year. We partner with Bright Network and Investment 2020, and they have meaningfully improved the both the gender and the ethnic diversity and socioeconomic diversity of the grads and the interns that we have. But that's, for me, that's one part of the puzzle. The pieces, you bring them in the organisation, but help people to feel included, help them to stay, grow, and retain them. And so the work we've done there is sort of set up employee resource groups to try and understand how. So as a leadership team, we are quite gender diverse, but we are all white. So how do we don't understand how somebody, an ethnic minority is experiencing Readington. How do we get to understand that? Well, we've recently set up a group that will help feed that back to give people safe spaces to talk about their experiences and to feed on how we can improve things. And the other piece we've done is sort of think about mentors and role models. So how do we make sure that we can nurture that talent? So we do take it seriously. It's just a question of with 200 people, and as you say, you can't just go and do a sweeping change to your entire employee makeup. It's about how do we change things now, knowing that it will take a while to sort of shift the dial.
So real focus on lived experience as well as dialing up the recruiting pipeline where you're recruiting in the most, which for you is grads.
I was literally going to say, just to be maybe somewhat controversial, to think about gender, all of us have an experience with gender, right? 100%, mothers, sisters, whatever.
Women are everywhere.
They're everywhere, right? and it's a much easier topic to get your head around, right? Because clearly 50% women, 50% men. Of course, it makes sense to have 50% women and 50% men in an organisation. Makes sense. If I tell you you need 10 black people in your organisation, you're like, what? Why do I need 10? Why not 20? Why not 1? Like, whoa, I don't understand this. What about an Indian person, Eastern Asian? What? I don't get it. So I think the race and ethnicity is much harder to get your head around. It's a much harder conversation. And I think that's part of it. Also, it's relatability, right? So there are people that can price out diversity in England, right? So they can live in the countryside, far away, and not see anything different. They went to Outer Hebrides, whatever. They don't have to see diversity. They don't have to. So yeah, sorry, maybe. They don't.
You don't have to go that far.
Okay.
You don't have to go
I was trying to be
far.
politically correct, but anyway, no. You can price it out, so you don't have to mix with or see people that don't look like you if you choose not to. And that's an important thing, because if you see women all the time, you interact with women, much easier to put them in your environment, right? But if you don't see a black person or an Indian person or anyone that's different to you or have an opportunity to interact with them, or you see what's in the media and the news, whatever, it's much harder for you to psychologically think about this. And I think that's part of the reason why it's been a harder topic to kind of embrace for people, because they just don't know what the right number is. And I'm like, forget all of that, that's just noise. What you need to think about is what structurally in your organization is stopping talent flowing through it. You forget targets. People have targets. I'm like, targets are kind of an excuse, a kind of a decoy, right? You're not dealing with root cause. You're dealing with symptom. Deal with root cause. What is the reason why someone that's black, someone that's Indian, someone that's a woman can't come into your organization and flourish? What are the policies and procedures you have in place? Where are you looking? These are the types of things. If you fix that, it will just diversity and inclusion will happen naturally in your organization. You don't have to have targets to have a certain amount of people in your organization. It should happen because there are no barriers to entry, right? And that's what I think we really need to focus on, because having targets is just forcing it. So all you're doing is forcing diversity. Diversity is a reality, inclusion is a choice, right? So let's deal with the barriers that are going on. Let's try and fix that, and we'll get this diversity that we need.
So Paris, I'm going to come to you in just one second. I think there's some really important stuff here. There is a concept called minimizing contact, which you and I talked about just a few minutes ago. And I don't know if you've heard it. The first time I heard it was in Binna Kendall's Racism at Work book, but it absolutely floored me as I began to understand it, which is this concept that we live in a very, very diverse world. We might live in a city like London, which is exceptionally diverse. Our neighborhood gets a little bit less diverse, or our workplace gets a little less diverse, and by the time you get to your dinner table, people tend to look like you. And minimizing contact describes that diversity shrink to the place that you bring the most trusted people in your life. The people who sit around your dinner table shape your thinking. They shape what you go do, they shape your belief systems. And I think it's hard to make some of these, in particular, race equity interventions or understanding what I should do if your dinner table isn't racially diverse. And I think many of us are guilty of this. Same with socioeconomic. You know, the question of, are we breaking bread with people from different economic classes than ourselves? I think most of us probably know the answer to that. Unless you intentionally cross those barriers, they don't tend to happen. And whether you're white with white people around your dinner table, or black with black people around your dinner table, or Asian with Asian people around your dinner table, I think it's a really important one, because it's hard to manifest the type of work environment you're talking about if we're not manifesting it in our personal lives. Para?
Sorry, I think we have an opportunity in the workplace to force that. So I think, you know, and it's a very simple thing, but I think one of the most powerful things we've done in our organization is the reverse mentoring with the senior management team. And they're now friends. You know, there's a bond that's been built up, and they never would have become friends if they weren't forced into a reverse mentoring relationship. And then, you know, it's in all the books about best practice, but I don't know whether we all do it, but it's very powerful.
Do you know what, just very quickly, do you know what's interesting? The pushback on that is sometimes people say that companies can't deal with a societal problem, right? That's what tends to be said. And I think, well, actually, companies have changed society, right? So we think about like breakfast cereal and eating 3 times a day and having breakfast, and it be Kellogg's Rice Krispies. Wasn't it those guys that made up breakfast? Yeah. I don't know. And everyone feels like they have to eat 3 times a day. So I'm using that as an example. So companies can have an influence in society.
Yes, and we only live in one world. Whether we're at work or we're at home, there's one us in one world, right? Companies absolutely can and should. Paras?
Yes, I was going to slightly just build on Darren's point about sort of looking at organizational orthodoxy. And, you know, we talk about sort of talent, and especially talent around sort of culture and ethnicity. I think one of the things that becomes critical is sort of just challenging yourself on how are people getting their, if you like, their personal brand at work developed. So, you know, one of the things that was really striking for me during my time in Asia is that, you know, across the sort of range of different cultures that I worked with and I was responsible for, different people by their very culture would not speak up on a VC. You know, some would not even put their camera on. So their opportunity to have that kind of moment where they shine on a call and get the attention of ... is just not, you know, it's not sort of culturally done. So that means that you've got to alter your sort of orthodoxy as an organization to actually meet them where they need to be for them to sort of be able to represent the contributions they can make. Because when you then have a one-on-one conversation with them, one of the most frequent conversations I would have in the region is, how in a global firm do I raise my profile? How do I become eligible for, you know, that opportunity or that opportunity? And it requires you to really sort of look at those habits. It's not even policies, it's actually just the habits in your organization, and ask how you can evolve them.
Absolutely. Sorry, there are 29 new questions that have just came in. I think we've but this iPad is going crazy. I think, so first of all, we have committed to look at some of these questions after today and respond to some of them more broadly. It was one of the things that was asked of all panel members is, would we go back? Because there are some great questions, including HR so white, and what can I do as a more junior person to really elevate the priority when I'm not the C-suite leader? There's great questions in here. So we will pick some of them and answer some of them because I think they're very rich. I want to finish with one question, and there's probably only time for maybe one of you to answer it, maybe two, but I think it's part of the killer question in the room for your industry, which is, how are you making sure that the products and services that you're creating are not exacerbating income inequality. And what I mean by that is, how are you making sure you're not making rich people richer and poor people poorer? Because that has to be an inclusion question for this room, for those on the call, for those in the room, and for the panel members. I think it's a really important one to consider. So how do we make sure we don't enshrine income inequality in what we do day in and day out as a business?
Okay, so...
Oh, he went for it. Look at that. One brave...
No, I don't want to jump in ahead of it.
No.
So I think, again, in my organisation, it's about, how can we, financial wellness, how can we support people in the workplace? But in the workplace, we're only getting one subset of society. So this is a challenge that I've had. How do I get my employees to understand the broad cross-section of society when our interaction is only in the workplace? And we've gone down the charity route. So we partnered with a charity called the Money Charity, who provide financial education into the community, so into prisons, into kind of refugee centres, into community centres, to run financial workshops. And our employees go and run those workshops. And the benefit is that gives them an exposure to a group of people that they would never meet in their ordinary daily lives, and they bring that experience back into the business.
I suspect many people in the room will have a good answer around what we do from a charitable, and it is, and I love it, Steve, and I love what you guys are doing. I want to plant the seed, and I'm running out of time. What do we do with our products and services? And because we can reshape society by the opportunities we give to people who come as our colleagues, our employees, right? Our employee value proposition, and people who earn money in our firms. We can do it through our customers and through our third sector work. I'd love to elevate the customer conversation without necessarily answering it here. So this is the unanswered question. How are you and your firms working to make sure that we're not really re-embedding some of the inequality in our society? So there was so much in here, what works, what doesn't. I loved, we started off with Steve, a new leadership model. I fired my C-suite, no. And I put a new leadership model. You heard it here, folks. I loved, Paris, your shallow intent versus deep intent, and really getting into the deep intentional and the why, and what happens if we don't. Your cultural carriers as well. Equal is not always fair. Darren, what quote? I think that might be my quote of the afternoon. Leaning into that frustration, making sure that what we're doing in our inclusion and diversity programs for colleagues works for everyone. Showing that you care, and in particular when people are worried about saying the wrong thing, leaning in with intentions and listening. It doesn't cost you anything to listen, but don't be lazy. Which brings us to passive leaders and what we can do to really help skill up and mobilize our leaders as a force for good in this space. I think targets are important, but if all you do is targets, there's a real problem, right? We would measure everything else, so we should measure this thing called diversity if we were really serious about it. But getting to the root cause rather than using targets as the plaster, absolutely spot on. And so I would leave you with the final two things, which is checking that your dinner table is as inclusive. I think we all have a role to play in that. Those high affinity relationships in the workplace do not happen if you're not having high affinity relationships in your life. And then spending a bit of time thinking about what we can do to use our industry as a force for good, because I think we're getting there, but there's more to do. So thank you, Katherine, Paris, Darren, Steve. Would you all, those online, a big well done.